Hello there, very good evening and welcome to Let's Talk Politics. I'm your host, Edward Layne, and of course, as we always say, this program is really dedicated to highlighting the progress and development taking place under the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration. But we also use the opportunity to respond to the lies and misinformation coming from the opposition camps. This evening, I'm joined by the Honorable Dr. Ashni Singh, the Minister of Finance. Rather, if I get that title correct, Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance. Minister, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Thanks a lot for inviting me, and it's always a great pleasure to be on your program.
So I want to get right down into this, and I know the news would have been dominated over the last few days with, in large measures, the activities of His Excellency, particularly those in Mexico in the first instance, a very powerful presentation at the CELAC summit, and of course that was followed by his participation in the general debate and all the other activities of the 76th rather, General Assembly of the United Nations. Um, Outside of participating in the main activities of the UN, there were quite a number of interesting events, particularly the bilateral engagements with not only other heads of states but also heads of IFIs. Minister, your opening comments with regard to the president's uh, uh, stay in the U.S. and Mexico, and then we're going to go into some details.
Sure. So, first of all, Eddie, once again, thank you for me. It's always a great pleasure to be here with you and to be with your viewers as well. It's really great to be on the program again. Secondly, I'm really glad that you chose that subject to discuss because I think it's been an incredibly exciting week or 10 days for Guyana on the international stage. You mentioned the president's participation in the CELAC summit in Mexico, which of course was followed by the UN General Assembly. And you're absolutely correct that what we've witnessed is two major international, well, in one case, a major hemispheric event, and that's the CELAC summit. And in the case of the UN General Assembly, the major global gathering of world leaders annually, in which Guyana participated fully, and I'm going to return to what I mean by Guyana participate, and which I believe send a lot of very clear positive signals regarding Guyana's place on the international stage. Let me say this, that what is quite clear from the president's engagements both in Mexico and in New York is that Guyana now occupies a position on the global stage that we have never occupied at any other time in our history. There is more international interest in Guyana. There is more international respectability. Our country enjoys more international respectability than at any other time in its history, and we enjoy more international global respect. And that is evidenced by the, like you quite rightly said, by the several engagements that the president has had. Let me first focus on the president's address, his contribution to the general debate of this year's General Assembly. That address was delivered by the president today, and it was an extremely important address. And those who have not seen it, I would encourage you to watch that address, because in the president's address today, he highlighted all of the major global issues that are of importance and interest to Guyana. And he articulated and advocated Guyana's position in a very clear, explicit, and forceful manner. And I will mention just a few of these. He mentioned, for example, first and foremost, the issue of vaccine, access to vaccines, vaccine equity, and international portability of vaccines, allowing people who have been vaccinated to travel worldwide, ensuring that countries have access to vaccines, adequate access to vaccines, ensuring that countries are able to achieve herd immunity, vaccines are rolled out nationwide to protect their populations, etc. That's an absolutely critical issue, and it's an issue that affects not only Guyana, it's of course extremely important to Guyana, but it's an issue that also addresses all other developing countries. And when the president speaks now as president of Guyana, a country of growing international visibility, a country of growing international prominence, and a country of growing international respectability, when he speaks, he's not only speaking as a voice for Guyana, and he was an extremely forceful voice for Guyana today, but he's also speaking on behalf of the peoples of developing countries around the world. He's also speaking on behalf of our Caribbean brothers and sisters. And so he spoke expansively and extensively and forcefully on the question of vaccine access and vaccine equity. He spoke on the issue of climate change. And here again, climate change is, of course, an extremely important, critical issue to Guyana. We have just come out of extremely devastating floods that wreaked havoc across our agricultural sector, that wreaked havoc across households. Thousands of households were inundated with flood waters, and people had to be relocated from their homes. The president came out and spoke passionately and strongly on climate change, which is an issue of very strong and compelling relevance to Guyana. But it's also an issue of very strong and compelling relevance to our Caribbean brothers and sisters. And so here again, and indeed all other low-lying small island states, like countries in the Pacific, etc. And so what we saw was President Ali using his voice as president of Guyana to speak strongly and passionately about the issues that are most important to Guyana, but also using that voice as a voice for the peoples of all developing countries around the world. And so vaccine access and climate change were only two of the issues. He spoke on a number of other issues: access to concessional resources, the peculiar vulnerability of small island states, etc. And these have been themes that Guyana has consistently been speaking on, and the president articulated our position. He used the platform of his address at the General Assembly today to articulate Guyana's position in a very forceful way. But then you make the point, Eddie, and I'm glad that you mentioned this, that these meetings are just as important for the main address that you give as they are for the various side events that you participate in and the various bilateral engagements that you have. And I have to say that President Ali had an extremely packed agenda. I'm not sure how they managed to pack all of those meetings in. He must have literally been moving from one meeting to another meeting to another meeting. And in many cases, those meetings I've had the privilege of participating myself in many UN General Assemblies, and you're traveling around sometimes from one venue to another in a city that's incredibly busy, moving from the UN headquarters to our permanent representative's office, to sometimes some other country offices. I don't know how they packed. It was really an incredibly packed agenda. But he met, like you quite rightly said, met multilateral institutions and hemispheric and regional institutions, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the Inter-American Development Bank, two extremely important organizations, and engaged with the leadership of those organizations. He met with a remarkable number of our valued and cherished and he just met Colombia. He met also with the president of Ghana. He met with the president of Brazil. He met with the president of Austria. He met, of course, with our regional brothers and sisters, with whom, as you know, we have a very special relationship with our Caribbean brothers and sisters. You saw he met with Prime Minister Mott. In even in Satsilac, he met with a number of other Caribbean prime ministers, Prime Minister Ralph Gonzalez and others. And so this was an extremely packed agenda where our president and his delegation managed to meet with valued and cherished friends globally, both through hemispheric and regional institutions and both through bilateral engagements with friendly countries with whom we share strong fraternal ties. And I have to say this, that what we witnessed over the last 2 days or 3 days, and indeed, if I go back to CELAC, what we witnessed over the last week was the way to this is that President Ali is a working president. He's a working president. He's interested in getting the work done. He's busy meeting people, talking to people, advancing our country's interests. And our government, from one, has been a working government. We're not a ceremonial government interested in only pageantry and pomp and ceremony. We're a working government. Whether it is at the United Nations in New York, meeting with presidents and dignitaries from around the world, or wading through flood waters in Guyana, visiting distressed communities, or visiting and doing outreaches. As you know, literally all of our ministers have been doing outreaches to address pressing issues of concern, whether it is to hear what people's problems are with water supply or with housing, whether it is to hear what people's problems are with infrastructure, whether it is to hear what people's problems are with the national insurance scheme and helping to fix those. We are a working government. And the last few days of the president's engagements on the world stage demonstrated not only to the people of Guyana, but indeed to the world, that we are a working government. We are interested in getting work done. The president is not in New York for sightseeing. He's not in New York for relaxation. He's in New York to engage with his counterparts globally. And I think he made remarkable use. I felt incredibly proud as a Guyanese person. Put aside that I am a member of President Ali's cabinet and his government. Put that aside. I felt incredibly proud that world leaders from around the world, remember these were 3 days in New York. They have a packed agenda. They need to decide which countries am I going to do a bilateral with. And all of these leaders decide we must meet with President Irfan Ali of Guyana, because he has something to say that we want to listen to, and because he's coming from a country that we need to pay attention to. And I will tell you this, put aside for the moment that I am a member, I have the privilege and honor of serving as a member of President Irfan Ali's cabinet. Put that aside for a moment. As a Guyanese,
I think I think we have lost Dr. Dr. Ashni Singh there for a moment. But once he's on back, sometimes the internet can give you a little bit of a hustle, a little bit of a hassle rather, sometimes. But I want to pick up from where the minister would have left off and to touch on a couple of things. He spoke about some of the themes Dr. Ali would have examined while making his presentation at the UN General Assembly today, participating in that general debate. Importantly, he touched on the vaccination, he touched on issues of climate change, food security, he touched on, but an important issue as well that he touched on, that is a representation not only for Guyana and for many Caribbean countries, but for Guyana, Caribbean countries, African countries, and a large part of the world, and that's the issue of reparations for our ancestors and the products of our ancestors who suffered as a result of the slave trade. It's an issue for many countries seem to be a taboo issue where they don't want to touch that. You always find them trying to play a safe, quote unquote, safe game when it comes to dealing with the issue of the slave trade and why countries and the products of our African brothers and sisters and foreparents who were traded as slaves ought to be an issue of discussion. President Ali has taken the bull by the horn, if you want, and addressed that issue. And I can tell you, the presentation that we saw today, I want to spend a few minutes on the presentation that we saw today, was excellent. I've looked at the reviews, I've looked at the comments from many persons, and they've all concurred that Dr. Ali made a presentation, and if you want, can be considered hitting the nail right on the head on every single issue that he touched on. Doc, I see you're back. But I was making the point that you touched on the issues of vaccines and so forth. But a significant issue that the president touched on in his presentation today, which is not only him representing the Caribbean, but also many countries in Africa, and that has to do with reparations for countries where our African brothers and sisters and our foreparents were traded as slaves. He represented many, if not all, the Caribbean countries when he spoke about that, and I made the point that that has been an issue for many. That seems to be a taboo issue where leaders don't want to talk about them. I haven't heard, many past presidents, save and except Dr. Jagdeo, raising this issue. And so that's another major issue that he would have touched on that really, was a representation of the people of the Caribbean. Before I bring you in back, I want to share, and I'm seeing a lot of commentators, and I'm going to read a few paragraphs from one gentleman who confessed that he has been a PNC all his life. And he has never left the PNC and he remains a member of the PNC. Who said that Mohammed Irfan Ali, sorry, kudos to Guyana's President Mohammed Irfan Ali for having the courage to raise the issue of reparative justice for people of African descent at the United Nations today. He went on to make the point that despite all of those who consider themselves to be intellectuals in the Caribbean and in Guyana, outside of former President Jagdeo, Dr. Ali is the only other Caribbean and Guyanese leader who had the courage to stand before the UN and raise that issue. So that is another major issue, Dr. Singh, that Dr. Ali represented well. And I'm saying these things, and I know you made your points, and we're going to get to, when you look at the response of some quarters, which would be natural responses, the natural response from them, but how trivial they are, but we're going to deal with that. I'll bring you back in here, and then we'll deal with that in just a bit.
Sure. So, Eddie, you're absolutely correct. He addressed this question of reparations, which is, you're absolutely correct. And I here again, I will say I'm proud to have been part of successive People's Progressive Party governments that have never shied away from taking on and advocating issues sometimes that are thorny and that other leaders sometimes might be reluctant to address. And we have been unequivocal. We have been unequivocal on this question, and you're absolutely correct. President Jagdeo previously has spoken on it. President Ali spoke very clearly and very passionately and very strongly today on it. And in fact, this is not an isolated example. This government, the People's Progressive Party in government, this time around and the previous time around and on every previous occasion, the People's Progressive Party has always been a party in government that is willing to take on issues of global or regional importance, not only issues that affect us domestically, but issues that affect us regionally and internationally, and advocate those issues. We've never been a party that shies away from taking a worldview on matters, taking into account global developments, global issues, taking a stand on issues of global importance and advocating them. And this is an example of an extremely important and extremely emotive issue that President Ali spoke out very clearly on. And I will say this, that our ability to speak unequivocally on these important issues, our ability to engage internationally, meeting with bilateral partners around the world, meeting with international institutions, also has to do with our credentials as a government. Don't forget that in 2020, Guyana returned after a long struggle. Guyana returned to the democratic fold of nations. Don't forget that from December 2018, after the no confidence motion, to March 2020, Guyana was teetering on the brink of returning to the pre-1992 dictatorship. And from March 2020 to August 2020, the entire world had to raise their voices collectively from whichever corner people were speaking. The entire world had to speak out before the APNU AFC respected the will of the people, respected the principle of democracy, allowed the will of the people to prevail and the results of the election to be accepted, resulting ultimately in President Ali assuming office on the 2nd of August. And so the ability and capacity of President Ali and indeed of previous People's Progressive Party presidents to occupy the world stage, take a stand on global issues, speak on global issues, enjoy the respect of their peers, also has to do with our credentials as a party that respects democracy, as a party and a government that respect the principles of democracy. And so some of what you are seeing right now is also the fact that Guyana has now returned from being a pariah state. Don't forget that during from December 2018, after the no confidence motion, a lot of the rest of the world started to disengage with Guyana. Because after December 2018, the constitution was clear, within 90 days an election should have been held. An election was not held. And all manner of absurd challenges were placed regarding the results of the no confidence motion. So from the time March 2019 came, the rest of the world started to disengage with Guyana. And from the time 2nd of March 2020 came, and after about a week, and it was quite clear to the world that the APNU AFC had no intentions of respecting the will of the people or respecting democracy and democratic elections, the rest of the world started to disengage with Guyana. And so by the time we got to July and the 1st of August, Guyana was a pariah state. Guyana was a pariah state under threat of international sanctions of all sorts. And so what you're witnessing here is a manifestation of Guyana's return to respectability, Guyana's return to the fold of democratic nations. What you're witnessing here is the international response to the restoration of democracy in Guyana, and to Guyana's return to the fraternity and fold of democratic nations worldwide.
And importantly, Dr. Singh, you touched, I think you hit the nail right on the head when you spoke about, people now having a government in place that is first and foremost legitimately there by virtue of the vote of people, but a government that has demonstrated and a political party that is in power that has demonstrated its respect for the rule of law, its respect for the democratic values and the democratic norms of a society, and the fact that a government and a party that has fought tirelessly not only between March 2nd, 2020 and August 1st, 2020, but also pre 1992 to protect and to safeguard democracy. As a matter of fact, in 1992, The world hailed those elections and the victory of the PPC as a return to democracy in Guyana. So it is because of these principles, these traits of the PPC in government and out of government, whenever this party takes office, you find that the level of respect for Guyana and its leadership significantly rises. But what we have, and I want to address this because I know we're running out of time. So we have been talking about all that the president has been doing, including a speech that has captured the attention of the world, all the world leaders, praising His Excellency for his presentation and for the arguments and the matters that he would have addressed. Despite the significant number of bilateral engagements with world leaders, only this afternoon the president met with a delegation from Saudi Arabia. And I think he had another meeting with a Kuwaiti delegation. He's met with the leaders of Maldives, um, and you name the country, Brazil, countries around the world. He made presentations at a number of major global events, including the White House organized, or President Biden's organized summit on COVID 19. What you have in Guyana, you have an opposition, and I think we need to address this. So petty, so short sighted, and so empty that they haven't seen anything important or anything significant about these engagements. By the way, engagements that will eventually bear fruits for the people of Guyana. It's not going to bear fruits for just the leaders of the PPP or just the supporters of the PPP. It will bear fruits for every single Guyanese. The more we engage with these countries, the more foreign direct investment we can attract. We can have better relationships with countries, and ultimately it will benefit every single Guyanese. What do you think the opposition sits on Facebook wholly and on YouTube wholly and talk about? Whether the president failed to cross a T or dot an I, or whether the president should have, or whether the vice president should have been on the left side of the president or the right side of the president during engagements, whether the president should have worn a blue suit or a gray suit. That's the kind of trivial discussion you have coming from people who themselves should be proud of the kind of representation Dr. Ali and his delegation has made for Guyana.
Well, Eddie, to be frank with you, if you hadn't raised it, I wouldn't have touched it because it is, in my mind, unworthy of attention and comment. Some of the reactions to which you allude. But as you have raised it, I will, of course, respond to it. Let me say this, that it is not a secret that the APNU AFC has always been, throughout their respective history, whether, predating the time that they were called APNU AFC, when they were PNC, it's not a secret that this is a group of so-called politicians who are far more preoccupied with form rather than substance. I'm not going to send you too far back into history. They were far more preoccupied over the 5 years that they spent in office. They were far more preoccupied with painting over everything green, changing the letterheads from whatever color existed to green, changing the napkins from whatever color existed to green, engaging in redundant pomp and ceremony and pageantry. That was what they were preoccupied with. If you look over the 5 years that they spent in office, you see 5 years of preoccupation with frivolous, unimportant, superficial things. Pomp, pageantry, ceremony, superficialities, frivolities, the color of the napkin, the color of the pen, the color of the ink, the color of the paper. That's what they were preoccupied with. Not with getting the people's work done, not with getting real work done. And so this shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody because the APNU AFC has never been a party, and I will call them a party because they are one. The APNU AFC has never been a party concerned with substance, the things that really matter. Whether that is because they lack the capacity to do so, whether it is because they lack the will to do so, whether it is they lack the interest to do so, or whether it is a combination of all of the above. They have never been concerned about the things that really matter to people. They have been concerned about the superficialities, like I said, the things that don't matter, the frills. Like I said, the most important thing, the most lasting sign of the APNU AFC's 5 years in government is a long list of green buildings, green fences, and 2 arches on the road. That's the big legacy that they've left after 5 years. They haven't left anything else that is positive or constructive. They spent 5 years in government painting over buildings, reprinting letterheads, changing signboards, and building 2 arches. And so this should not come as a surprise to anybody. They are either incapable of, unwilling to, or disinterested in addressing issues of substance, the things that really matter. You know what really matters to people? Keeping them safe. You know what really matters to people? Keeping them in work, or creating jobs for them, or improving their livelihoods, improving their circumstances. You know what really matters to people? Ensuring that the country's resilience is secured for the long term by arguing the points that we've been making successfully on climate change because of our peculiar vulnerability to climate change. That's what really matters to people, not, like you said, who sit down where, who wear what. Those things don't matter. They don't matter to people. And but like I want to say this very clearly, I'm not in the least bit surprised, and I don't think anybody else should be. Look at the legacy. Look at the legacy. Prior to 1992, the color was purple. Apparently, that was the royal color. Everything was painted purple. You would recall purple apparently was the favorite color of the maximum leader, right? So this obsession with color is not a new thing. You will recall, Eddie, you might be too young to remember, prior to 1992, apparently the maximum leader loved purple. So everything was painted purple. From 2015 to 2020, apparently the maximum leader loved green, so everything was painted green. Let me say this, the People's Progressive Party, we are a party for all colors, the entire rainbow plus all other colors, those that didn't make it to the rainbow. And so, as was demonstrated over the last week, the president leads a government that is concerned about issues of substance, not superficial and unimportant issues. And I think that was amply and abundantly illustrated over the last week. I want to add one further thing. It is not difficult to check back the track record over the last 5 years. The APNUFC participated in the UN General Assembly over the last 5 years. It wouldn't be difficult to check back to see who were the leaders that they engaged in. What were the meetings that they engaged in when they went to the United Nations General Assembly? They might have dressed up in a fancy suit, and they might have been sitting on the right side or the left side or whatever it is. I don't really follow a lot of these comments. I didn't even know this was going on until you mentioned it. But they might have dotted all of the I's and crossed all of the T's that you mentioned too. But where was the real work? Where was the real work? How did they advance Guyana's position on the world stage? Who did they meet with? What are the issues that they discussed? It wouldn't be difficult to go back and check the record for the last 5 years. Or did they go to New York to go and have present one speech? And I don't know. But the record is there. And I feel confident. I feel confident that you would be very hard pressed to find any record in recent time of a president who made better use of his time in New York while participating in the UN General Assembly. I believe you would be hard pressed to find another recent example of a president who made such good use of his time while participating in the UN General Assembly.
I have to agree with you.
Guyana is
Go
back. Guyana is back once again, having been restored to the fold of democratic nations. Guyana is back on the world stage, and we are occupying a position on the world stage that we have never occupied at any other time in our country's history. And we have to salute our president for the remarkable effort that he made over the last week and the remarkable achievements that he recorded over the last week in ensuring that Guyana's interests were advanced globally.
And importantly, Doctor, before I wrap things up, is one, imagine the workload that His Excellency had over the last week in terms of the number of engagements. And this is happening in a COVID-19 environment. So he was somewhat restricted. Just imagine in normal circumstances what you would have seen coming from the president. So I agree with you. I think remarkable work has been done over the last week or so by His Excellency and team, but more importantly, it's the kind of engagements that were created. We're seeing already the president said the vice president will lead a delegation to Ghana. And the whole Ghana issue, I saw yesterday they were so upset, They were complaining because the Ghanaian president, I think, came here during their term in office. They somehow felt that, Ghana should isolate themselves from Guyana. The isolation actually took place between March 2nd and August, well, December 2018 rather, and August 1st. His Excellency was sworn in August 2nd, 2020. That is when the isolation of Guyana took place. But they somehow are running with this impression in their minds that the countries who engage them should not engage Guyana. I think it's because, and I heard you mention a couple of reasons why they don't want to accept certain things because of I think one of the words that you left out from that is because of their incompetence. Clearly, may very well be a reason for them not wanting to touch certain major issues and to deal with issues of climate change and all these other things. But the point is, Guyana has created the kind of network through His Excellency's engagement in just about 5 days or 4 days. The engagements during that period has created a massive network for Guyana, has established the kind of diplomatic relations, rebuild diplomatic relations in some instances, um, that has that will bring significant benefits to Guyana. I give you a chance to close the program, Doc, some closing
No,
comments.
let me say this, Eddie. Let me make this crystal clear. President Irfan Ali needs no defense or no supportive arguments. He needs no defense when it comes to the volume of work that he's getting done. Like I said, I didn't see some of the comments or uh, reactions that you alluded to. I don't follow these things that closely. Um, but our president, the president that I know, needs nobody to be advocating or making a defense about how much work he's getting done. I'm not surprised at the agenda that he discharged over the last week. I'm not surprised because I know his work ethic. This week it has been on the international stage, but on another occasion it might be domestically confronting issues of domestic, whatever is on the domestic agenda at the time. And I will say this, that even while President Ali is in Guyana, and I know this for a fact because I've had the privilege of working very closely with him, I've participated in many of these engagements, even when he is in Guyana, on an ongoing basis, he's engaging constantly with world leaders from every continent. He's engaging constantly with leaders from around the world. You mentioned the president of Ghana. I had the privilege just maybe 2 months ago, of joining His Excellency on a call, participating with him, joining him on a call that he had with President Akufo-Addo of Ghana. And so this is not a one-off. It's not a one-off by any means whatsoever. The engagement with all of his counterparts from around the world, whether it is the Middle East, whether it is Latin America, whether it is Africa, whether it is Europe, certainly the Caribbean, the president is constantly in contact with his counterparts around the world. And in particular in the Caribbean, almost on an ongoing basis, he's in contact with his counterparts. So President Ali and this government don't regard international affairs as a one-off event that is ceremonial and you go to the UN and you give one speech and that is it. This is an ongoing activity, engaging with the rest of the world. And we have been engaging on an ongoing basis with the rest of the world. But this is also it's also not symptomatic, it's also indicative. It's also indicative of the approach that President Ali has taken to governance and government across absolutely every aspect of government operations. So even the pressing issues that are, whether it is flood today, like I said, or the pressing problems of tomorrow, or creating jobs, or building out infrastructure, or creating opportunities for young families to have access to their own homes, or ensuring that the private sector has opportunities to grow and expand rapidly. Whatever the pressing issues are, they're constantly engaging our president. So frankly speaking, the last week did not in the least bit surprise me, either in the magnitude of activity, in the volume of activity that President Ali had on his agenda over the last week. I'm not in the least bit surprised, knowing his work ethic, and like I said, having had the privilege of working with him for a number of years, not just since he assumed the presidency, but we were cabinet colleagues previously as well. I'm not in the least bit surprised that he worked with the agenda that he did, the packed agenda that he did. And I will say too, I'm not in the least bit surprised that the opposition responds. This is characteristic. I wouldn't expect anything differently.
And certainly, one of the important things you have to look at, Doc, before I close here, is the fact that Dr. Ali don't sleep at 8. He
Well,
don't go he don't go to
or
bed
five,
at 8 p.m.
or 5 p.m. for that matter.
But tomorrow, Dr. Ali is hosting a news conference, and I think at that event he will speak more about these engagements and what came out of them and the benefits that will bring for Guyana. And that will be carried live on his official Facebook page and I think on local television. Doc, it's a pleasure to have you this evening. I think we needed more time, but as usual, time flies whenever we have these discussions. But you're going to be back. I'm sure you're going to be back with me. Um,
Th- Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Eddie. As always, it's a great pleasure to be here with you. And I apologize to you and your viewers. I understand that there might have been an interruption in the transmission at some point in time. I apologize to you and the viewers for that. But thank you very much. It's a
that
great
is
pleasure
fine.
to be here. And I'd be happy to come back at any time that you wish me to.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashni Singh, Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance. And to our viewers and listeners, we say thanks for watching. Have a good rest of the evening. Remember to stay safe. Bye for now.